Going to be talking about annual reviews of the IEP. I want to start by answering some questions that you might have. What is an annual review and what is an IEP? So, an IEP is an individualized education plan, and all of our students in the extensions program are going to have one of these. And every year we meet to review that IEP for the student, at least every year. Some IEPs might be written out for a shorter period of time, and that's on a case to case basis, but we're going to be meeting at least every year to review that IEP. All right, so inside of ECATS, this is what your screen should look like when you're on your student's view. And we are going to be focusing on that IEP tab under the EC process drop down. Let's talk about how you know when an IEP is due. So there's a couple ways that you can find that information out. You can go to the student information tab, and the drop down is going to be under eligibility. So if you click eligibility under the student information tag, you're going to see a bunch of information on this page that's going to include the IEP date, the IEP start date. You're also going to see information about when their last reevaluation was due. So that's one way that you can find out that information. Another way, and the screen would look something like this, but with information. Another way that you can find out is when you are in the student search view and you go to the select a student. So let's just say you're searching by student number or last name, whatever it may be, you're going to see this information as a quick view for you. So you'll be able to see the student's name, their ID, and then you're also going to be able to see when their last eligibility was, and then you're going to be able to see their IEP end date as well. The eligibility is important because when you're looking, if a student is due for a reevaluation, we do reevaluation every 3 years. So if you see that a student had their last eligibility in 2021, chances are you are due for eligibility or reevaluation this year. But what we're really focusing on today is that IEP end date. So if you see that end date is coming up, it is very important to start working on this documentation, right? Because we want to have this done ahead of time. We don't want to be working on this last minute, especially if you have somebody that you're sending it to review, or if you're working as a team. That's something else I want to mention too. If you're planning an IEP for a student, it's important I like to create a calendar invitation just so everybody on the team knows, and that includes their service providers or anybody who might be involved in the creation of that IEP document. So what you'll do is you'll go to the EC process drop down and you'll click on the IEP tab. And when you click on the IEP tab, you are going to see these right here. So these are all of the sections that you need to fill out of the IEP in order to be able to create and finalize that IEP. Those include the meeting purpose, student profile, assessment summary, source of relevant info, present levels of academic and functional performance, special factors, secondary transition, annual goals, services, service goal integration, accommodations, ESY services, ESY goal integration, and creation of the IEP. Let's go over each of these sections. The first section is the meeting purpose. When you select meeting purpose, you are going to have some different boxes that you need to fill out as far as information. So when we're looking at this meeting purpose tab, we are going to be first choosing the type of meeting that we're holding. An initial is kind of self-explanatory. If it is the first IEP that your student has, if you've just established eligibility for the first time and you're writing that initial, or if they are an out-of-state transfer and you've just determined eligibility and you are writing that initial IEP, that would be when you select initial. An annual review is going to be for most of the rest of our students. If your student has had an IEP in the past and you are just reviewing that IEP, you're going to want to click annual review. I often get this question, what is an addendum? How do I know if this is just an addendum? And an addendum is going to be a small change to the IEP. So you could have had the IEP recently. Let's say you had the IEP in August, but you want to make a slight change, maybe a little bit of a program change, right? Maybe change some times, like the student is starting to do more time with the general education peers for a special area class, for example. You're going to want to go in and do an addendum to that IEP. You're not going to do a whole new IEP with a new start and end date. You're going to be just doing an addendum. In that case, you have a new start date. So if it's today, let's say today is October 5th, you're going to want to write a new start date, let's say October 8th, and you are going to want to do the same end date as the previous IEP that was written. And the cool thing is when you select addendum, it's going to tell you what that end date was, so that you don't have to go back and look for it. It populates that for you, and then you just add that same end date that you had on the previous annual review. And that's just for an addendum. So for the purposes of this training, we're going to be focusing on the annual review. So you click annual review. Then you're going to put the meeting date. That will be whatever day you're meeting for the IEP. Next, you're going to do your start date. And let's say in this hypothetical, your start date is September 8th, 2023. It's important to write your end date for the IEP to be 1 year minus a day out. So you're going to write it for, let's just say if today or the start date is 9/8/2023, you're going to be writing that IEP for 9/7/2024, just as an example. You also want to make sure that that end date is not on um, a weekend or a holiday or that sort of thing, but that's how you're going to choose that end date. The next section is the assessment summary. So in this section, you can see that there aren't any current assessments in here, but as we discussed before, when you're determining eligibility, that is when you're going to put those assessments in, right? So let's say that during eligibility, you did an educational and a psychological, maybe you did an adapted physical education evaluation, right? Those assessments are actually going to populate here on the IEP. The only things that you would add in this section that would be new for the IEP are progress monitoring or something along those lines. So you can add that in here if it's a new assessment that's since the last annual review. But it's important to have something populated in here because that's what you're going to use as a source of relevant information. So the way that you might make that connection or that you will make that connection is on the source of relevant information page. So in this hypothetical, let's say you had progress monitoring and maybe an educational put in that previous assessment page. Now you're going to have more than just that because it takes more than that to establish eligibility. But let's just use those as an example. In the relevant data section, and these might already be populated for you, you might just be updating the source of relevant information. But for us, we don't have one in this place yet, so we want to make sure that we're adding them. And these are any areas where the student might need specially designed instruction. So if you have an extensions program student, you're going to see more areas here. You're probably going to have a math, a reading. You might also have functional communication or vocabulary development if they're receiving speech. You're going to have adaptive physical education if they qualified for that. So it can be a bunch of different areas. Whereas, like in transition, you might have daily living skills. So that can change based off of the student. But for this training, we are going to just select one so that I can show you how to attach those assessments and those sorts of things. But we're not going to do all of them. But just know you're probably going to have more sections in this area. So I chose math. And once you select math and you press save and continue, you're going to see that it populates here. This is where you add those assessments. So you say add or remove existing data. And when you do that, it's going to give you the long list of all the assessments that the student has, and you're going to click the one that's relevant to the area of math. After you do that, you're going to be able to move on to the present level page. And here you are going to put the present levels of academic performance for any areas where you have selected that the student needs support. So like I said, you're probably going to have more than just math, but for this example, we just have math. I want to talk to you a little bit about how we write those present levels. So when we're looking at our present levels, there's some components that we want to absolutely have that are non-negotiables. You see at the very beginning that I have something that says based on. And the based on is anything that I use to make the determination or that would clarify these statements. So we want to make sure that we're either saying classroom data, teacher observation, a combination of classroom observations and progress monitoring data, whatever you use to make these decisions or make these statements true, you want to put that in your based on. So an example might be based on informal classroom observations and progress monitoring data. And then I have the next section would be what the student can do. And I like to put 3 or 4 of these if I can for my students. It's also important to know that these always have to be supported by data. We can't just say student is able to identify print concepts, the front cover, back cover, and spine of the book. You want to be able to say what the data is for that particular skill that you're saying that they can do. So in math, I might say based on classroom observations and progress monitoring data, my student is able to identify numbers 1 to 5 with 80% accuracy based on 20 observable data points. You're going to want to make sure that you have that data for each thing you're saying that they can do. As students get older and they progress, you're going to notice that your students are going to have a lot more cans, right? Because every time they achieve an IEP goal, I like to add that to their can statements. And as they get older, you're going to have several can statements. You can also use classroom data to populate those can statements, the things that they can do. The next statement that you're going to have in your present level is going to be what they cannot yet do. So you have your can statement, but then you have your cannot statement. These are the things that they are not yet able to do. And those not yet able to do statements are going to be what you use to write your IEP goals. So for every IEP goal that you have for a student, you are going to have that statement that says that they're not able to do it. I want to bring attention to this because if you have a statement that says a student is not yet able to do a skill, you need to have an IEP goal for it. So if you have 2 IEP goals in math for a student, you need to have 2 statements that show that they are not yet able to do that skill. If you have 2 statements that show they are not able to do a skill or 2 particular skills, then you need 2 goals. So let's say that you have 1 goal in math. Your statement, let's say the goal is for adding with sums within 20 or something like that. You're going to write the statement, student is not yet able to solve addition problems whose sums are within 20. It's a very, very specific statement. And then you're going to write the deficit or the impact statements. The impact statements go at the end of your present levels and they refer directly back to the goal statement. So the cannot do statement or cannot do multiple statements. So if you have 2 statements that say a student cannot do 2 skills, you're going to have multiple impact statements. So for my example, my student has 1 skill that they are not yet able to do. So 1 skill that we're going to have an IEP goal for. And I'm going to be very specific in this. So I'll say the student's skill gap in his ability to solve addition problems with sums within 20 impact his academic ability to meet grade level expectations in the general math curriculum. You may or may not have a functional impact statement as well. I have both of them in here just in case there's a functional impact. For example, if you have transition age students and they have a goal about identifying, let's just say currency, right? Then it might have a functional but also an academic impact. So you really have to do this based on the student, but you will always have one or the other because they have to be impacted either functionally or academically in order to have an IEP goal set. So that is what your present levels will look like. And then the next section is the additional information section. So here you're going to see a section where you can describe any relevant medical information. So this would be provided by the parents with the approval of the parents to submit this on the IEP. So this could be medication that the student takes. It can be a history of seizures, anything that is relevant to the educational day. I've even had students where the parent will submit that they have a medical diagnosis of autism or they were born prematurely. This is really up to the parents to share and then you guys to determine as an IEP team if it's relevant to be included on the IEP. And then the next section would describe how the disability impacts the involvement in the general in progress and involvement in the general curriculum. So this section would actually be made up of those impact statements. So that's why it's so important to write those impact statements. And this section could look different depending on the student or how they're accessing curriculum at school. But typically, what I like to do is include in this section those deficit statements. So I would say that you would take that statement example in math, the student's skill gap and his ability to, and so on and so forth. And I would actually copy and paste that into this section because what we're saying here is this is the skill gap. This is how the disability is impacting their involvement and progress in the general curriculum. So that's just an example of something that would go there. The next section of the IEP is the consideration of special factor. And this is a pretty lengthy page. So let's get into this. This is going to start off with the question, is the student an English learner? Now, the tricky thing about this question is that you are not going to be able to change the answer on this question. This now populates depending on the information that we have in PowerSchool. So if the student in PowerSchool is registered as a student who is in English as the second language learner. So let's say they have their first language as Russian or Spanish, whatever it may be in PowerSchool, you're going to see that this is going to say yes. And then you can go ahead and put additional information in there and be more specific. If they have English as their primary language via PowerSchool, it is going to automatically populate no, and you are not going to be able to change this. So the thing about this is if you want to change this, you're going to have to make a more data your data manager type change in PowerSchool. So that's just something to know about this section. The next section asks, does the student have any special communication needs? In this section, this is really where you're going to get that input from your speech pathologist. They are going to, let's say they get speech as a direct service or even as a as SAS. If they have goals in the section, you're going to click goals, accommodations, and so on and so forth. So just really think about how your student is receiving assistance for their special communication needs. And that's what you're going to indicate in this section. So if they're getting speech therapy, you are going to say, yes, they do have special communication needs. And then you're going to detail how those needs are being met. And your speech therapist will probably put a little blurb in that additional information section. So they'll help you contribute to this part of the IEP. The next section is, does the student require assistive technology, devices, or services? This is something that you can get input from the speech therapist, you can get input from occupational therapists, as well as the AT team, depending on what your student's particular needs are. And you would answer yes or no, depending on what their needs may be. The next section says, does the student have a documented visual impairment, including blindness? This is something where if your student is receiving VI services, so students for or services for students who are visually impaired, you're definitely going to press yes on here. And then you're going to add those details depending on if this applies to your student. If it does not, you simply say no. The next section asks, does the student have a documented hearing loss? I want to stress this section because if you say yes to this section, it's going to give you the opportunity to complete the communication plan worksheet. And you definitely want to do that if the answer to this is yes. The next section is for a student who is deaf or hard of hearing, the following has been considered. You can see those bullet points there, the student's language and communication needs, opportunities for direct communication with peers and professional personnel in the student's language and communication mode, academic level, full range of needs, communication mode. This is the information that's going to go on that communication plan worksheet, and you would want to say yes if you have a student who this applies to, or simply no if you do not. The next section is about behavior. Does the student have behaviors that impede his or her learning or that of others? If you have a student who this applies to, you say yes, especially if you have a student who has a BIP or has been recently considered for an FBA. If you're going to have behavior goals on the IEP for a student, you want to say yes to this section. And the next section is about adapted physical education. If the student has been seen eligible for APE, which means that they've gone through an APE evaluation during the time of reevaluation or their initial review, then you're going to go ahead and say yes here. If they have aged out of APE, then you're going to say no. So let's just say you have a student who is 11th grade, 12th grade transition level, and they're no longer receiving APE services. You're going to want to indicate no in this section. The next section asks, is the IEP team considering instruction on the extended content standards for this student? And being in an extensions program classroom, this is going to be a yes. And the reason that's very important to indicate here is because once you say yes, this is what's going to appear on the screen. So after you select yes, you're going to see the opportunity to open up the alternative assessment eligibility worksheet. It is essential that this is not completed before the meeting. I'm going to say it one more time because it's extra important. Essential that this is not completed before the IEP meeting. This is something that is to be gone over with the parents. The parents need to be present for the review of this. We should never predetermine, but we should definitely not be drafting this information before we meet with the parents because it is extremely important. Essentially, what this worksheet is doing is making sure that our parents are fully aware of what they are giving up and deciding on an alternative placement for their child. And each of these questions is going to go into detail to make sure that they understand the full gravity of this. The first question, does the student demonstrate a significant cognitive delay and limited adaptive skills that may be combined with physical or behavioral limitations? You're going to notice that these questions really describe the student. You're going to get a lot of information. So you're going to want to answer yes to all of these, and you're going to want to go over the impacts of what answering yes to these means for our students. So you're going to go through, you're going to add additional information. So you're going to specify what that looks like for the student. You can't just say yes and leave the additional information sections blank for these. And you'll go through the student information, and you're going to fill this out with the parent in the meeting with the IEP team. And you'll go through each of these. And it's 5 questions long, but it's really important to take this time to explain to our parents that choosing this pathway for our students, this alternative assessment pathway, the extended content standards journey, means that they are not going to qualify it's not a diploma seeking path. The standard course of study would earn them a diploma at the end of their time with us in CMS, but choosing the extended content standards course of study is going to mean that they're going to get a certificate of completion. And it's very important for our parents to understand that that's what it means to decide on this placement. Next, you're going to see a section that says the supports for academic and functional personal changes or circumstances if applicable. So this is any information that you think it's important for a team to know outside of the information that you've already discussed. This is a really important section for me personally. I go to this section first actually when I get a new IEP. So if I get a new kiddo, the first thing I do is go to this section because this is where the teacher writes those things that you need second one usually a lot of the questions that you might have about a student or what they need can be answered in this section, and obviously all parts of the IEP are important, but I particularly like to go to this section first. This is where you're going to probably find information about feeding, bathrooming, any triggers or potential areas that a previous teacher has already worked through that you want to make sure that they know ahead of time. This might be an information where you have not necessarily medical information. You can, but I mean, I put all sorts of things in here. Down to I've had students where I've said, look, they are really preferential to blue items. If they see pink items, it's going to be a trigger for them. And those are the kind of things that you might put in here just to get to know the student better. The next section is area in need of specially designed instruction. So in our hypothetical, you only see math here because it's the only area that we selected for this hypothetical student. On your student, you're going to see a number of areas here. You're going to probably see functional communication, fine motor, gross motor, math, reading, writing, all of the areas where they are being served, you are going to see here. And the question here is, do they require specially designed instruction? And the answer is simple. For some of these areas, math, reading, writing, yes, probably going to require specially designed instruction, right? They're on the extended content standards. They need to be taught by a professional who understands specially designed instruction, right? So That is a yes. But sometimes our students are not necessarily receiving direct services with goals for speech therapy or occupational therapy or physical therapy. And in that case, they would not be receiving specially designed instruction for those areas, right? So all that means is they'll still have a present level, but they won't necessarily have goals. That would be your students who are receiving SAS services. And we'll go over that a little bit later when we talk about the actual time spent. So that is just to know that the core areas are going to be yes for that specially designed instruction, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a yes for all the areas where they are receiving support. So next, we're going to talk about annual goals. This is the next component of the IEP. So when you go to the annual goals page, you are going to see all of the areas where you have indicated that the student needs specially designed instruction because those are areas where we're going to have IEP goals. In this particular one, you're going to see that the present levels have populated here, and we're going to start by clicking Add, Delete Goals. This is going to open up the next page, and this is going to allow you to add goals. Typically, if your student already has an IEP established, there are already going to be goals here, and you're going to need to update those goals. But with this student, they do not have goals in this area yet, so we are going to click Add Goals. There's some things I want to talk to you about as far as what are the best practices when we're creating an IEP goal? And what we always want to make sure that we're doing is we're creating SMART goals. This means that the goals need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Any goal we're writing into the IEP should be a SMART goal, whether it is a functional goal for like behavior, for example, or if it's an academic goal, they all need to be SMART. When we're writing academic goals, they need to be standards based. And here is how you would do that. I have linked here a direct link to the extended content standards. You're going to click that link and go all the way to the bottom of the page. And you are going to expand the area that you're looking for support in. So that would be math. There it is, math. Scoot right past it. And then you're going to select the grade that your student currently is in. So let's just say that my hypothetical student is in the 5th grade. And I want to specifically show you how I would do this because I know what you're thinking. My student is in the 5th grade and they are not working on 5th grade standards. How am I going to write a goal for comparing numbers within 100? My student is not doing that currently. I hear you. I definitely hear you. I think we can all relate to that. But when a student is in 5th grade, it is really important that we are not writing them an IEP goal that says they will identify numbers 1 to 5. That may be something that they are working on, but it is not a standards driven goal. An example of how I might do this is let's say you have a student in the 5th grade and they are not yet working on this particular standard, comparing whole numbers up to 100 using symbols greater than, less than, or equal to. They might not be doing that, but can we adapt this skill, this standard, to be more on level with our students while it's still being standard driven? It means that you're driving toward completion of the standard. It has to be related to the standard. Writing Identifying the letters in your name is not standards driven. It's not driving toward an overall ELA standard. So we need to make sure that we are keeping this in mind while we're creating standards. If I were to take this standard, an example might be, given an array or given 5 problems with different values, different visual values, the student will identify which symbol goes in its place, or like that sort of thing. Like maybe I want my student to be able to identify which symbol fits in to complete the sentence, the number sentence. But my student is not yet able to do numbers within 100. So maybe I would make one of the parameters that I want them to do it with numbers within 20 or numbers within 10. So, given values, comparable values within 10, student will select the appropriate symbol, and then I give those as an examples to complete a number sentence, something like that. You just want to be able to make sure that you are keeping this standard in mind when you're creating that goal. I hope that makes sense. So that is how we're going to make sure that our goals are standards driven. An example of a SMART goal might be given the use of adaptive materials and assistive technology, student will select from a field of 3 visual choices to identify the solution to an addition problem with sums no greater than 20 with 75% accuracy over 3 consecutive data collections. And you can see that that is a measurable goal. It's achievable for the student. So this might be a student who is in the 4th grade, and we know that we need repeated addition to do multiplication, but we're not quite to the point where we're successfully doing addition yet. So this might be a modified goal for them to make sure that it's still standards driven, but it's not necessarily a goal specifically just standard word for word, right? And then it's also time bound. I want them to be able to do this over 3 consecutive data collections. I also want this to, it's an annual goal. So naturally, our goals are time bound by being annual, right? So that being said, let's use that goal as our example goal. So the goal that we just said, given adaptive materials and so on, this is that addition goal. You are then going to, so you would have clicked add goal and you would have put that goal in there. And then you're going to go to goal details and objectives. Here you are going to find a couple questions that you need to answer about the goal details. First of all, you're going to say whether or not this is a transition goal. If the student is not transition age, it is not a transition goal. So for my student, this answer is a no. Then you ask if it does it have assistive technology required. So if you're using visual options, I actually specify assistive technology in here for this particular student. So it's a yes. But if you're saying 3 visual choices, the use of visual supports is an assistive technology. It's a low tech technology, or it's actually more of like a no tech technology, but it's still assistive in the means of technology, right? So they need some kind of support there. And then as far as progress monitoring, you want to make sure that you're selecting something to go in here that is actually truthfully what you'll be using to progress monitor. I usually say data sheets because that is generally how I progress monitor academic goals, but you might do something different. So just make sure you're reading that list and pick the one that best describes how you are going to monitor progress. If it's something where the student is going to be doing worksheets, you might want to click. There is an option for student work samples if you're going to include that. But just remember, if you do include that, that means that it needs to be included in the folder. So when you're talking about data, you are going to want to upload that as progress monitoring data. And that can be done with pictures. It doesn't have to be the actual paper copies of the worksheets. The next section is mastery criteria. So what percentage do they have to meet in order to achieve mastery on this goal? And it's 75% accuracy. That is the overall goal. Next, you're going to add objectives. So you're going to come down and you're going to click add objective. Your goal needs at least 2 objectives. That is best practices. And you're going to add those objectives. There's a couple ways you can do objectives. So let's talk about this. In this example, let's do this example first. So in this example, I kept the overall skill the same. I want the skill to be solving addition problems with sums no greater than 20. And I kept that the same for every objective, but what I changed was the mastery criteria. So in order to master objective 1, he needs to be doing this with 55% accuracy. Master objective 2, it would be 65% accuracy. And then to master the overall goal, it would be 75% accuracy. So that's one way that you can do this. You can create goals and objectives that increase in the demand of mastery accuracy. Or another option is changing the skill. So you can escalate the skill and you can kind of scaffold that skill through the objectives. So in this example, yes, I want the overall for him to be able to solve addition problems with sums no greater than 20 with 70% accuracy. And the objectives still have 70% accuracy, but I have simplified the skills. So first I want him to do it with sums no greater than 10. Then I want him to do the skill with sums no greater than 15. And the overall arching goal is sums no greater than 20. If you choose to change the skill, to increase the skill, to scaffold the skill, then you want to make sure you're remaining the same in your percentage for mastery criteria. It is darn near impossible to, and I mean, you can if you want to make your life really, really challenging, but it also dilutes the data to have the skill changing while the accuracy is also changing. And honestly, ECATS is not built for that because it's not really the best practice when it comes to progress monitoring a goal. We want to really monitor one or the other. So if you are entering this goal into ECATS, I always err on the side of increasing in accuracy, but that's not always appropriate for every skill. So just keep that in mind. It's definitely based on the particular goal that you have set for the student. All right. And then after you've added those objectives, you want to go to details for each of them. So we'll start with the first objective and click details. When you go in there, you're going to see that objective and you're going to want to make sure that you add the method of progress monitoring to match the method of progress monitoring that you're using for the overarching goal. And you're going to do this for both of the objectives. Make sure that you click into both of those objectives and you add that progress monitoring method. The next section is services. This is where you are going to add the areas where the student is going to be receiving specially designed instruction. So you'll see little tips in the blue boxes as you move through the IEP. So this says indicate the least restrictive environment in which the student can achieve the goals. So when you click on add special ed services, you're going to have the option to add different areas. So these are where they're going to be receiving special ed services. In the extensions continuum of support, so in our setting, I can't really think of a time where you wouldn't want to have all these here, and I'll show you why in a second. So I like to put every area in here. You can't add more than 4 at a time, so you're going to want to add them, save and continue, add them, save and to continue. Daily living skills would represent the time they spend at lunch. Social emotional learning skills, that would represent the time that they spend, let's say, at recess. Once you add these into the section, you are going to see some different details that you add to those areas. So this is why you want to add all the different areas that you can. Math, reading, writing, assemblies, like all this stuff is going to be here, and you're going to add those in because you're then going to put the details as far as the location where they're going to be served. So let me show you what I mean by that. They might be getting math 60 minutes once per day. You're going to put the duration, the start and end date of the IEP there. And then you're going to put where the location they're being served is going to be. So math is going to be in the special education setting. So I put special education there. If a student is at metro school, you will have them in the separate setting, right? So you also want to put anything that is going to be general education in that location. So let's say that they are always doing lunch with their general education peers. So they're going into gen ed classes for lunch. You're going to make sure it says gen ed there. Same thing when it comes to recess. If they're going to recess with their gen ed peers, you want to put general education there so that they are getting that with their peers every single day. The next section you're going to see in this area is additional service information. Here, you are going to select their transportation consideration. So, are they getting transportation as a related service, or it's not required as a related service? And then you're going to want to describe that. So let's say that they require special transportation related service. This would be an address stop. This would be a lift, a chair lift on their vehicle. So I don't even want to say bus. I would say that they require a chair lift for transportation. Um, and the reason you want to say that is because we want our students to, how do I say this? It might not always be on a bus, right? If they need an air-conditioned vehicle that is required as a special transportation service, like it must be an air-conditioned vehicle, then they might not be able to serve that need with a bus. They might find themselves on a vendor or a van, but we do not indicate vendor or van or particularly bus on the IEP. We just give information about what the student needs, and then transportation takes care of how they're going to meet that need. So if they can meet that need on a bus, if they can do a lift, a chair lift on a bus, if they can do air condition or shorten ride on the bus, then it'll be met with the bus. If they cannot, then it'll be met with a vendor. But transportation makes that decision. We just tell them what the student needs. And then also, if they are going to need a child safety restraint system, this is an accommodation. It's not a related service. So you would want to say the student requires accommodations in the form of a child safety restraint system. And this would be those harnesses that you see for student safety. It would also be a star seat. Either way, it's a child safety restraint system, and you do want that to be on the IEP. The next section reads, if the student will be removed from non-disabled peers for any part of the day, explain why the service cannot be delivered with non-disabled peers with the use of supplemental aids and services. This is very important. This is what you may hear as the least restrictive environment or the LRE statement. You are going to put all of the reasons why the student needs to be in the special education setting with their non-disabled peers. Why are we removing them from the general education setting? So this can be a pretty lengthy box here that we're writing out, but typically some of the things you might see here are the student benefits from a low student to staff ratio. Particularly if they're at metro school, it will be a low student to staff ratio, 8 to 1 or something like that. We're going to say specifically what they need and why that can't be met in the general education environment. You're going to say something about extended course of study. You're going to say things about accommodations. You're going to put the special transportation services that they're receiving. You're going to copy that in here as well. So yes, it's going to be 3 boxes above, but then it's also going to be right below there, and you're going to have that there as well. So this is going to be that LRE statement. And next, you're going to see the section that says progress reports on IEP goals will be issued in accordance with the student report card schedule, blah, blah, blah. There you go. You see that right there? This is when you would indicate the schedule if it is different. So I would usually put in here that they would receive them quarterly in conjunction with their general education peers, right? But if they need a more frequent progress report, like let's say for some reason your students need them, you know, 6 times a year. I don't know. We leave no room for error here. Like some students need a more frequent report card, in which case you would go ahead and indicate that right there by clicking that box. If the student is in preschool, describe how the student is involved in the general education program. If your student's not in preschool, obviously you're not going to click this box. And then the next session, describe consultation or training for school staff unique to the student needs. This is really where you're going to see a lot of information from your OTPT SLPs. They're going to put that in here, VI, HI. You're going to see that written in here. But also, if the student requires the support of let's say a staff member who knows how to use a G-tube or a catheter or something like that, that would be special training that would be needed in order to meet the needs of the student. And you would indicate that here as well. All right, next is the goal service goal integration page. This is where they're going to be receiving, like where and when they're going to be receiving these services. So what you want to do is everywhere where you have a goal, you are going to click Edit Goal Integration, and you are going to select when that is going to be supported. So services supporting this goal would be math. So they're going to be doing this during math time, and you are going to make sure that those match up for all of your subject areas. The next section of the IEP is accommodations. So here you see classroom activities, district assessments, and state assessments. Let's start off with those classroom activities. So you're going to click Add Class. Now I'll say this, if you have a student who has already had an IEP and you're doing an annual review, all of these should already be populated. It's just that very first one where you're going to have to add all of the class activity that can take a little bit of time. But after that, it would just be adjusting it. So you're going to select the areas where the student is going to be participating, and you're going to do the participation level at the next component. So I like to select every single thing that the student might be doing during the day. And that can look different. Like, for example, my student is in elementary school and they're not getting life skills science, and they don't do extracurricular activities. So I didn't select those, they didn't apply to my student. And then once you've done that, it will move you on to the next page where you select their level of activity. And this is pretty much saying, do they participate in regular class activity? Or do they participate with accommodations? If you click not participating, that area actually removes from this page. So don't click not participating unless they're not participating in that area. And you're going to do that for all of these sections. I want you to bear in mind too that if you are using the accommodation of assistive technology, for example, and let's say that this student uses a Go Talk in the classroom. I want you to be aware that if they're using a Go Talk in your classroom or they're using a visual schedule in your classroom and they really benefit from that and they need that support, chances are they're going to need that in math too, or music or art. Or assemblies, like they're probably going to need the ability to communicate no matter where they are. So, something important to do is if you're using assistive technology in the classroom during math and reading, and they get it every time that they're in your room, it is decent and best practice for you to make sure that they have that mode of communication wherever they go. It doesn't matter where that is. It can also be, I mean, on field trips, like bring that with you. But especially on this section here, you want to make sure that that accommodation is everywhere they go. It not only is the right thing to do, but it protects the student as well. Because if they were to go to their school, let's say like you always remember to bring their assistive technology, but that might not be so self-explanatory if they were to go somewhere else. And you want to make sure that they are supported and their teacher, if it's not you, knows, okay, this kid needs his communication device no matter where he goes. He needs assistive technology in the form of pictures, whatever it might be. So you want to make sure that you indicate that. Next, it's going to give you an option, well, extensive options on what you can say the accommodations are. So let's just say you're putting these all in for the first time. You can actually select assistive technology and it's going to populate to all of them, which is awesome. It saves you a little bit of time. Um, there are a whole bunch on here though. Like you'll see Braille. If you're using Braille paper, you're going to want that to be in everything. If they need testing in a separate room, make sure that that's on all your academic areas where they're going to be doing testing. Read through these and make sure that this doesn't sound like your kid. If there is anything that's not listed here, like you don't see preferential seating, right? Preferential seating is essential for some of our students. So that would be an other, and you would actually specify that information. And I can show you how to do that next. So anything that's not listed here, put it as other. This includes like if a student is in an activity chair and they're in it for support during the school day. Like maybe they come in a wheelchair, their home chair, but they get moved into an activity chair. You want to have a blurb in there about why they're in that activity chair, why they're using that during the day. If they have a walker or a gait trainer, those are some things that you would indicate here. Now, your physical therapist is going to be able to give you support in how that statement should look. So that's when you're going to want to get with your physical therapist and say, hey, I know they use an activity chair during the day. Here's why they use it. What can that statement sound like? How should I write that? So they can support you with that too. They're part of your IEP team, right? So make sure you're getting that input. If you select other for any of those accommodations, you want to make sure that you come down here to add implementation specifics. And it's going to bring you to this page where you can put in those specifics, right? So if you said assistive technology, you can't just say assistive technology. You are going to need to give examples of what that might be. If your student uses a specific, like let's say they use a tablet with a specific program, this is where you're going to put that information here. I have just kind of a general statement. Student requires use of total communication approach throughout the educational environment. They require access to AAC for means of communication. And that's just a generic statement. You're going to want to be a little bit more specific, but you're going to want to put that for the specifications for everything that you added. And if you had one that said other, this is where you're going to write that information for other. The next section is district assessments. If you're adding any district assessments, that is the button that you click to add those district assessments. And then if they're taking a district assessment, you want to also put their participation level. If they're getting accommodations in the classroom for math, you want to make sure that they're getting those same accommodations when they're taking a district assessment. Same thing goes for state tests. You add the state test in here. That's where you'll put like the extend one test for reading, math, science, whatever might be appropriate for the grade level that they are on. And you want to make sure that you're adding, like I said, those accommodations. Make sure they match. If they are getting assistive technology and shortened testing periods during math during the school year, then make sure they're getting that for their assessment as well for their state tests. And then next, you're going to see the alternate assessment box where you can indicate more information about that. So if the student is participating in alternative assessments, explain why the regular testing program with or without accommodations is not appropriate. And for our students particularly, I like to put something like this. So student is receiving instruction on extended content standard course of study. Therefore, NC Extend 1 math and NC Extend 1 reading are the most accurate representation of their understanding of academic concepts taught. This kind of just is common sense, right? If our students are receiving extended content standard instruction, they would not be equipped to be able to take a test that doesn't test extended content standards, right? We don't need to have them taking an assessment that is on the regular course of study when they're not being taught those standards. So we have to put a statement on here why. The next section is classroom activities, and this is when you're going to talk about the location. So remember before when we had them where they were receiving the specially designed instruction, we said this amount of time, so like 60 minutes once per day, like that sort of thing. The reason that's separate from this is because that might not always be like, let's say a student is getting resource and they're getting resource 2 times per week for 60 minutes per session. Like that is a more detailed section of how they're receiving that specially designed instruction. This just shows where they're receiving anything. So in our extensions classrooms, a lot of times those things overlap and this becomes a little redundant for like math and reading and writing, those sorts of things, our core areas. But for some students, it's not, especially a student who's not an EP and they are just receiving resource or speech, like that section is really meant for like where are you receiving specially designed instruction. And then here, or SAS. Here it includes everything. So we have art, music, you're going to have assemblies on here, library time, all of these things, and you're going to indicate how they are attending to this. So are they doing this with general ed? Are they doing this with special ed? Or are they doing this with both? So maybe sometimes your students do music with their special ed class and then sometimes you want to push them out and give them a little time out with the general ed population, like maybe they do that sometimes, right? And for those cases you might want to say both. Or assemblies, maybe you have special assemblies that are just for your extensions rooms, and maybe that would be both because you also go to the general education assemblies. You have to really think about this. You can't just blanket go through and put general education or special education for all of these because they're in extensions. That's not always the case. So make sure that you're really reading these and picking the one that best represents how your student is spending their day. The next section is for ESY services. This is when you are going to make a determination for extended school year eligibility. You may or may not be able to make this decision, right? You're going to want to go ahead and click the print this worksheet after the IEP. That way you're actually printing the page and it's not just indicated in the background in ECATS. But here you're going to make the determination. You may not be able to make the determination at this meeting. Let's say this meeting is happening in the beginning of the school year and you have not had time to collect data to show that any of these are the case yet. I typically like to have these meetings later in the year. So definitely after winter break, but usually after spring spring break as well to make sure you have a full year of data to support your decision. Here are the consideration factors that can either establish eligibility or not establish eligibility for extended school year. The first one is, does the student regress or may regress during extended breaks from instruction that cannot relearn the lost skills within a reasonable time? So this is a big one. This is usually the one that we see used often. This is for those students who go on summer break and come back and they have lost nearly everything. We like to say at least 50% of what they gained the last school year. And that can be detrimental for our students who are so many grade levels behind or so far behind in their skills. So that is a big problem. That is an indicator. If you have the data that shows that they're doing really great, they're on track to master their goals in reading and math, and then they come back from winter break and you are back where you started, that's a big red flag. That says to me that they are not retaining their skills over extended breaks. So you want to be sure that you're collecting the data to show that as well. You can't just say that, oh, I've noticed that. Like that doesn't work here. We need actual data that indicates that that's the case. If you notice that you have the data, it's the end of the year, you're ready to make this decision, you say yes. Cool. ESY. Check. You get ESY. Let's say that doesn't describe your kid. There are other parameters that can establish eligibility. So the benefits a student gains during the regular school year will be jeopardized significantly if he or she is not provided an educational program during extended breaks from instruction. Okay. This is something that we often see with our students who have behavioral challenges. Our students who really require that stricter, that more rigid approach to scheduling. They need access to the educational environment, and that can be jeopardized over extended breaks from instruction. This can be students who just really need that continuous support. Our students who maybe need that OTPT, SLP support in math and reading over the summer. So that would be an example of our students. You would click yes for that one if you determine based on data that student gains during the school year, the regular school year will be jeopardized. The last option is we don't see as often, but this is important to mention too. This is the window of opportunity. I wouldn't say we don't see it as often, but this is very specific. So the student is demonstrating emerging skill acquisition, a window of opportunity that will be without the provision of an educational program during extended breaks of instruction. The example I always like to think of is I had a student one year who got a cochlear implant in it was like the beginning of April, right? Is when they came back. And we were making great progress on their goal from April all the way up until end of May. And we knew that they were just on the fast track. They had a window of opportunity that would have been lost without the provision of that educational program during the summer. So we established eligibility for ESY, extended school year, based on that data that we collected. We saw that there was not really a lot of growth, and then all of a sudden we were having a huge window of growth. Maybe you change an instructional practice or you change an intervention and you find that perfect thing that works for your student, and you are just hitting the ground running, and it's only been a couple months, and you see the growth, and you know that this student is not going to be able to continue to make that growth and really take advantage of that window of opportunity over the summer, that is a student that would qualify for extended school year. If you determine yes to any of these, you're going to want to fill out this information here. And that's going to be yes, they did, or if they didn't, then it's a no. You put no here under that drop box. You want to put the determination date, and then you want to put the start date for ESY and the end date. Let's say you can't make the decision at that time. You don't have enough data. Parents want you to consider it. The team wants you to consider it, but you don't have enough data to support it yet. That's when you say it cannot be determined at this time. And then you say when you are going to meet again to make that determination. You want to do that at least obviously before the end of the school year. And then you're almost done. So this is when you are going to put that IEP, the date that it's sent, you're going to put that in here. You're going to make sure you select your LEA representative. You're going to put your special education teacher, regular education teacher, and then interpreter of results. Those are those required members. Then underneath this, you're going to see a box that just says a bunch of names, people who were on the team that are not necessarily required members, but they're on there and you want to indicate that they are there. For example, if the parents are in attendance, you are going to want to select those parent names if they're in the meeting. If they're not in the meeting, and here, let me explain to you why I haven't scrolled down here. I didn't scroll down because there's no way for me to go into eCats and not have somebody's name here. So there's no way for me to use like a test student, like somebody's name is going to be here. So that's why you're kind of stuck at the top of this page. But when you're looking at your page, you're going to see specific names here, and you're going to want to indicate everyone who's at the meeting. So if you have PT, OT, psych, their names are going to be in there. They're parts of the team, and you're going to want to indicate that they're there. There is a box underneath those names that is going to give you the opportunity to put a description of additional members that were in the meeting. This is where you're going to want to put, let's say that the parent did not attend the meeting. Let's say the parent gave you permission to have the meeting without them. You want to put that in here. Parent did not attend the meeting, but gave permission to go forward with the meeting on date. You put the date that you had it, whatever that may be. So you want to put that information in here. You cannot give too much information on that. Let's say that somebody was in the meeting but left the meeting early. So PT came in, they went over their part, they left. You want to indicate the physical therapist attended the meeting for the first half of the meeting and then they left after their portion was completed. This is where you put that additional information. That's stuff that needs to be noted that you want on the IEP. If there was an interpreter, a language interpreter, you want to put their name in there as well and why they were there. If it is a virtual meeting and you are not getting signatures on the IEP, this is where you indicate this meeting was held virtually, so no signatures were obtained at this time. You can have that in there if it's a virtual meeting and you did not get signatures on the IEP. Oh, I want to go over one section over here as well. So we didn't touch on this before. In your EC Process IEP page, you're going to see a section that says secondary transition. And I always forget about this section because I'm elementary at heart, but do not forget this section. If the student is going to be 16 years old or is 16 years old or is going to be 16 years old during the life of the IEP, you want to create the secondary transition information. So you're going to go through here and you're going to say who's responsible, who's given information about preferences, interests, course of study selection, and you're going to select who is contributing. So if you've done a interest survey or something like that to indicate student interest, which I hope you have if you're doing this, because the student needs to be a contributor to this, hopefully. Then you're going to say the student contributed. If you are getting input from the parent or family members, you want to click that too. If there is an agency that is supporting the student's interest or their course of study, or they're going to be helping plan that, then you want to put that there. School staff is usually going to be selected because you're the one writing this IEP. So you're going to want to go ahead and click school staff. And if anyone else is helping support, giving information about the student needs, then go ahead and click other as well. Like let's say that you have a student interest survey from their psychologist, their personal psychologist. You can consider that information here. This is really a section that is talking about the student's future. The next section that is extremely important is their course of study. Are they a F future ready core course of study leading to a North Carolina diploma? This would not be our students and extensions. It would be students who are on the regular course of study as far as earning a diploma. O, future ready occupational course of study. So occupational course of study students would click this one. They're still leading toward that NC diploma, but they're on that OCS. Or are they E, extended content standards? Those would be our extension program students leading to a graduation certificate. And then you're going to fill in the information below. So you want to make sure that you're completing their education and training that's going to lead toward supporting these goals, employment, independent living. These are the goals and supports. And then you're going to also see that on the bottom here, there are tabs for each of these things. So you do not need tabs for all of these things. But you do need you need to click through these tabs and consider each of these separate areas. So, what are the adult living skills that you're working on? What are the services that they're going to get? And you're going to add those adult living services there. Employment development, functional vocational evaluation, if you've done that. Um, if it's appropriate. And then you're also going to want to click on the instruction tab, related services. These are how all of these different areas are impacting and contributing toward this transition component, the transition area that you're working on. So these are all those post-secondary goals and support. So you're going to see that on the same page. And then once you're done, you're going to finalize this IEP and I like to draft it first and then I like to finalize it. And then you're going to move on to the prior written notice and complete the prior written notice. We have a separate training that's just on the prior written notice. So you're going to want to take a look at that as well to support you with the prior written notice. You're then going to want to move on to consent. You're going to need consent for services, especially if this is a initial, but I mean, make sure that you have a consent for services, formerly known as the Deck 6. You're going to want to make sure that you have a consent for services in their EC folder. If not, this is a great time to get it. So you're going to go to consent, you're going to do consent for services, and then you are going to make sure that you have it addressed to the parent, guardian, or student that is appropriate, the date that you're sending it. And then when you go to return it, you are going to resubmit it. So you're going to submit that document. It's not going to pop up though until you've actually drafted it and finalized it. Thank you so much for participating in this training on annual reviews for the IEP. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to your mentor, your EC chairperson, your compliance facilitator, and if you still have any additional questions, please reach out to your extensions program EC coordinating teacher. Thank you so much.